Wood's experimental result solution. Let's begin the solution by understanding the meaning of the sentence. Robert R. Wood's experimental result of there being temperature rise in a glass chamber because of warm air rising and mixing with cool air is the foundation of the greenhouse effect. Okay, so this sentence appears to present two different facts. What it's stating is that a certain specific experimental result of Robert R. Wood is the foundation of the greenhouse effect. And then it goes on to explain that experimental result in a lot of detail. And what is that experimental result? That temperature rise in a glass chamber takes place because of warm air rising and mixing with the cool air. So it's stating this cause and effect as the experimental result of Robert R. Woods, and this specific experimental result is the foundation of the greenhouse effect. So the meaning of this sentence is pretty clear. Now we move on to the error analysis of this original sentence. So to do that, we'll first try to split the sentence into its individual clauses so that our analysis becomes easier. So experimental result of there being temperature rise in a glass chamber because of warm air rising and mixing with cool air is the foundation of the greenhouse effect. So this sentence only has one clause because there is only one subject verb pair and there are no other markers for the presence of another clauses. So from subject verb standpoint, the pair makes sense and it agrees in number. Result is the foundation. There are no pronouns here. There is a modifier, and this modifier is actually explaining this experimental result of there being temperature rise in a glass chamber because of warm air rising and mixing with cool air. But if you notice carefully, of there being temperature rise, this is a rather wordy construction, and this can be written in a much more precise manner. So from the way the sentence is constructed, it has no real grammatical error except for this thing being more wordy of there being temperature rise. So we should find an answer choice that corrects this wordiness error, maintaining the meaning of the sentence and stating it in a much more precise manner. So now we move on to the answer choice analysis. So clearly choice A is incorrect because it is wordy. Now let's look at choice B. Robert R. Wood's experimental result of temperature rise that takes place in a glass chamber because of warm air rising and mixing with cool air is the foundation of the greenhouse effect. Now this part here that takes place, this part appears to be a lot more concise now. However, notice that now this sentence is no longer talking about a specific experimental result. It's talking about an experimental result of temperature rise. And this is the error in this sentence because this part here changes the intended meaning of the sentence. Okay, and there is a minute difference here, although a pretty significant one. I mean, I say minute difference because it's the difference because of changing a few positioning of the words, but it actually results in a distortion of the meaning. Because now this sentence is no longer expressing that complete experimental result that temperature rise happens when warm air rises and mixes with cool air. Now it's stating that, okay, it's a experimental result of temperature rise, and then it explains this temperature rise. So it no longer is explaining the experimental result. And then it's no longer stating that this specific experimental result is the foundation of greenhouse. Now it's stating that experimental result of temperature rise is the foundation of the greenhouse effect. So this choice is not correct because it changes the intended meaning. Now let's look at choice C. Experimental result that temperature rise in a glass chamber takes place because of warm air rising and mixing with cool air is the foundation of the greenhouse effect. Now this choice appears to be correct. Notice here that we have added one more clause here, that temperature rise in a glass chamber takes place because of warm air rising and mixing with cool air, and there is nothing wrong with this clause. It basically is explaining the experimental result in a much more precise manner. And there are no other grammatical errors. So this choice is the correct answer, appears to be the correct answer choice, but we will first look at choice D and E as well. Choice D, experimental result, the foundation of greenhouse effect is the temperature rise. that takes place in a glass chamber because of warm air rising and mixing with cool air. Now, this choice also distorts the meaning of the sentence. Again, there are no grammatical errors here, but notice the emphasis of the sentence has now changed. Now, what the sentence is stating is that a certain specific experimental result, and by the way, this experimental result is the foundation of the greenhouse effect, is the temperature rise. So, the result is the temperature rise, and then it goes on to explain how the temperature rise happens. So again, it basically it doesn't state the complete experimental result. It basically implies that Robert R. Wood had only one experimental result, because the way it's written is Robert R. Wood's experimental result, comma, the foundation of greenhouse effect. So it appears to state that he only had one experimental result, and that experimental result is the temperature rise, and that doesn't make sense. The result cannot be the temperature rise. So again, this choice also distorts the meaning of the sentence. Now let's look at choice E. Robert R. Wood's experimental result, which is that there is temperature rise in a glass chamber taking place because of warm air rising and mixing with cool air, is the foundation of greenhouse effect. Now this again is a wordy construction. Why? Because stating that result, which is that there is temperature rise, this part here is too wordy. So choice E is also incorrect, and clearly choice C is the correct answer, as we determined earlier.